Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for returning to our afternoon sessions in the Lansdowne Suite for the DSET main conference. I'll shortly be handing over to Colonel Charles Seaberry, who is going to be chairing this session, and we're going to be discussing basic, better, best practices. In our post-COVID world, where we're all getting back to the sort of new normal, we do have, although a few years ago we were using the platform to bring in a lot of our speakers virtually, which helped us enable us to continue to put the show on. We do try and get everybody here in person. However, just for unforeseen circumstances and down to people's availability, we do have a speaker in the next session that is dialing in from Canada. So it was just to warn you that there is a little bit of a delay between the platform and what happens in the room. So for Jennifer, she's going to be about 20 seconds behind. So we have organised with our speakers, and we've done our best to try and reduce the delay as much as possible. Please be patient with us. When Jennifer is asked a question, it will take about 20 seconds for it to come through on her end. She will then respond, and then we might get a little bit more of a delay. So it is a constraint that we are going to manage and keep calm and carry on this afternoon. But in case you're wondering why things might be a little slow and there's that very awkward silence for a few moments, if you can please bear with us, because we do really want to listen to what Jennifer has to say, and she's got lots to contribute and a massive amount of knowledge and experience. So we were willing to manage this constraint in order to get her here. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Charles now, and have a great session. Thank you.
All right, so hey, thanks Abby again, and all of the IT support in the back that's going to help us do this in two ways. As Abby mentioned, we're going to do this a little bit in person and virtually, so bear with us. First and foremost, I hope that you guys are enjoying your experience here at DSET. I got the great opportunity to chair the panel that we're going to talk about here today, and this panel is called Basic, Better, and Best Practices. And so today we're going to delve into a crucial discussion and have the opportunity to elevate our practices across various domains, from military, academic and industry innovations, and also acquisition management. We have an exceptional lineup of panelists who I'll introduce to you individually as they come up here. And so the way this is going to work is each member is going to begin with a brief introduction of who they are, and then go into a presentation. After their presentations, we're going to facilitate a discussion amongst you guys. And so what I'd like to preference is, as you hear their presentations, jot down a few tough questions so they can get after some of your answers. And I'll encourage you to think about what that is, and we'll also monitor the net online. Just keep in mind that this session is a fantastic opportunity for us to learn from each other and discuss how we all collectively can move from basic practices to better and ultimately best practices in our respective fields. And so one of the daunting tasks here is you're going to get 4 different briefings, but as you get those briefings, try to correlate them to what you do in your arena to associate these best practices that we're going to get to. So without further ado, I'll bring up our first speaker, Lieutenant Colonel James St. Commanding Officer of the Armored Trials Development Unit here in the UK. Lieutenant Colonel St. brings a wealth of experience in armored trials and development, and he will share some of the best practices of his extensive career. James.
Good afternoon, Colonel. Thank you very much. And I'm conscious that here we are at the post-lunch session. So thank you all for surviving the kind of lunch cramps and snooze and instead coming here. I'm hugely grateful to Tess and to the team for inviting me to speak. I'm conscious that, probably unlike everybody else at this conference, I would describe myself as having nothing to do with training. And in the resource-constrained world of the Army, I consider training as my nemesis, given that whatever money is spent in making better training is not money spent in me trialing new technologies of armored vehicles, for example. However, and really it's through Tessa's insights and my realization in my 3 years in command of the Armored Trials and Development Unit, actually the two are synonymous sides of the same coin, and essential that we bridge the opportunities between technology, both for vehicles and platforms and new guns and all that kind of stuff, and technology used to train that employment. I'm absolutely clear that the end state of military capability rests more in the ability of the users, the soldiers, to apply themselves than in pure terms to the capability of that technology. So as we go into basic, better, best, firstly, an insight into what the Armored Trials and Development Unit does. Behind me, you'll see, unlike many of these conferences that I speak at, I don't think many people here would have come across ATDU. And as of about 3 weeks ago, it no longer exists as ATDU. It's now the Army Trials Unit. We've subsumed the Royal Engineers, the artillery, the infantry, etc., into an organization commanded from my office in Bovington. But as I transition out the Army, my successor and the former CEO of the Infantry Trials and Development Unit, ITDU, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Dorr, has taken command of the ATU. So really the term ATDU is slightly past, but more on that to follow. However, as we look at that, people, ideas, and partnerships, that is something that I think should ring relevant to anyone working in defense, in wanting to improve our capability in the ground, particularly at DSET. So it transcends the pure terms of technology. Also, I bring your eyes to improve, optimize, modernize, and transform something that is equally relevant and resonant within the training world. So that really challenging question of basic, better, best. I would not have qualified myself in any way to talk about best, but I've definitely seen it done, described basic, and my efforts over the last 3 years in command of the ATDU, I would probably describe as better. Again, thankfully, it's a relative term, so 1% better is still better. I don't claim to be 99% better, but I think there are insights there applicable everywhere. And so when I spoke to Tessa, I was like, what am I going to talk about? What, I've got lots to say, but what do I have to say that your audience at DSET might be interested in? And really, her advice and insights helped me to break it down to processes, roles, culture, vision, and opportunity, as you can see. But I was slightly flattered by her statement that effectively, over the last 3 years, my little organization of 140 so people in Bovington is described as, it was described by her, how does a little organization with little resources deliver big ideas and tangible output? And I think that's something we're all striving at. So, process. Really simple, kind of taskings, the stuff that the military loves doing. It's a machine. You've got to feed it. Everybody within that machine drives their importance based on their ability to have emails come in and emails come out and have a sense that they've added value. I would describe that as basic. And most companies, no doubt many of yours, are actually approaching the problem very differently. The fewer people on the chain, the more effective something is, which again is something that stands outside of the military understanding. So how do we get better? We speak to industry. We learn from industry, but we particularly break how we see the world out from a point of view of how the Army sees the world. I was slightly flattered to have been selected for my role in command, having no real technological background, where all my predecessors did, primarily because I didn't think like them. And in fact, I think so differently to most people in green that kind of my longevity in the system is limited. But that different approach, I think, has generated tangible outputs, and I'll come onto that later. But the pillar approach and driving industry to link to specific pillars: improve, optimize, modernize, and transform. And the sharper we are in those descriptions, the easier it is for industry to engage with us down those avenues, when otherwise it's a jungle of opportunity that is very hard to transcend. But ultimately, one of the creations that in trials, which is inherently risky, is establishing a single controlling mind. And that, for example, for the Ajax trials where the noise and vibration was a problem, and the machinery struggled to deal with that, went all the way up to Parliament. And actually one of the simple answers was a sergeant who knew the platform, knew the processors, knew the engineers, knew the soldiers, knew what we were trying to do. And so it doesn't require big things to turn parliamentary level big problems, which hit the newspapers, to a solution. It was the addition of a single sergeant. I'm glad to say that he is now a WO2 in the space of sergeant to WO2 in 3 years, highlights the importance of simple solutions. And I'd say that that is an example of best. Now, roles and structures. The Armoured Trials and Development Unit had kind of, in Bovington, you have the driver and maintenance school, and then you have the gunnery school and the signal school. And really that's kind of Napoleonic times, G1 to 9, etc. So we rebranded to mobility, to lethality and survivability, and C4ISR instead of comms. So you really expand the roles into an effect, not a trade. And that, I think, is something that probably has resonance to the training world as well. I promised Colonel Seaberry that I would trundle on time. So again, we can delve into these in slower time. But the move away from at SO2 level, so my majors were split into common vehicle systems and weapons. We broke that into current forces and future forces. So really, trying to make our current fleet better is a totally different ask to designing and thinking about what the armored combat fleet or armored combat looks like in 10 to 15 to 30 years time. Because unlike making the infantry better, where you just give them a different gun and they just try, better knee pads and better helmets. I apologize to any infanteers in the room. I'm constantly very rude about them. But in armored vehicles, you need to make decisions today for something to turn up on the battlefield in 10 to 15 years time. Not, you want a new set of knee pads, you can have one in 6 months. So if we don't do that work today, and it's really those decisions in how we structure that has enabled ATDU to deal with and get aboard these problems early. And I'll briefly right at the end. As of 3 weeks ago, the Army Trials Unit has been created under one CO, as opposed to commanding officer of the Armoured Trials and Development Unit and commanding officer of the Infantry, and again 3 other branches. So again, generating coherence, because an armoured vehicle, well, it's used to drive around. So is that CSS TDU's problem? It might have an engineering dozer blade, is that, etc. So all these things are now being brought to generate better coherence, more efficiency, and better capability for the soldiers in combat. Culture, probably my biggest thing. I think the greatest evolution in capability of the British Army in the last, let's say, 5 years. Now, we haven't got time to kind of spin it around the room. Beards. Now, I could not care less whether anybody has a beard. I really couldn't. But it is finally the Army, some decision makers in the Army have realized that it's irrelevant to whether somebody is a good or a bad soldier. I, in command, threaten discipline on anybody who ironed their clothing, their combat clothing. Why? Because this is not designed to take 150 degrees of hot metal on it, because it erodes. So what? It's willful vandalism of military hardware. Oh, but it looks smart on parade. I couldn't care less. I don't expect it to be creased. That's the culture that I've really striven to arrive at, and that is how we're going to make our soldiers better. Again, I can talk all day long on that, but also empowerment and enlightened approach. The soldiers I've been lucky to have, finding out what drives them, what are they passionate about, and saying, go do. My job, and I'll come on to that later, is to deal with the consequences. And I put unconstrained contribution and aggressive inquisitiveness. I force them to, so I banned berets and saluting and got a massive wrist slap by the general that spoke to you yesterday, not my best friend, but because you cannot be in the future world if I force my soldiers to walk in red coats and sit in squares with muskets. Fact. And really, that, I think, is the central piece that is important to moving from basic, well done, you've done your job. Thankfully, our armored vehicles are salami sliced better at the same rate as the Russians are improving their kit, because we're all trying to think the same. No, we need to think totally differently, and that's how we leapfrog. And how do we do that? We change the equation. We behave differently with our soldiers. We make them feel empowered, and the army talks about it all the time. But yeah, stand in a line, shut up, do what I say, is inherently what most people, however enlightened they pretend to be, actually come back to being. 3 minutes. Unconstrained inquisitiveness and contribution. Whatever you want to do, go do, I'll back you up. And if it's not quite the right thing, we'll just shape it at the end. And even if it's not quite the right thing, I'd rather sweep up after you, but we've got ourselves to a better place broadly than going, no, your job is to do X, Y, Z. So, CEO's contribution. What could I have done, and do I think I did? Yes, well done, you've commanded, etc. That's basic. Direction and aftermath. Direction. Improve, optimize, modernize, and transform. Go do. Chase what you're passionate about. And do you know what? When I get an email from a one-star going, who's this corporal wanting to brief me and taking up my time? God, that's unacceptable. Well, that corporal is the person that single-handedly is probably the Army's lead on electric vehicles. And he is more of a major SO2, and I've had him posted to DNS as an SO3, as a corporal, because he wrote the business case, generated £1 million, got us 4 fully electric Land Rovers, and is working all the safety case, as would a good captain or major. So that, I think, is the cultural shift that needs to happen in training, that is starting to happen in trials to make that difference. But also long-term vision. The problem with trying to encourage industry to follow us into the future is, what does the future look like today? What does the future look like tomorrow? I don't know. You need a clear lighthouse to go to. And do you know what? It will probably shift over time. But in the 3 years I've been in command, I've been absolutely clear on what the future for mounted combat needs to look like. It's remote controlled, uncrewed ground vehicles controlled from within other crewed ground vehicles, etc. None of that autonomy, pardon my language, BS, or swarm mini drone BS, etc. Because that'll get defeated at some stage. We need to do today what will be on the battlefield in 15 years' time, and that hasn't changed. CAPE, some of the older will remember keeping the army in the public eye. Actually, for me, this was keeping ATDU in the public eye. My job isn't to go like, oh, what have you done this week? How many reports have you written? My job is to make sure that people recognize the brand of ATDU and ATU, and therefore you have an interest in reading the reports we've written. Because otherwise, we could write all the best reports in the world. I'm afraid no staff officer in Army headquarters reads them. They're too busy doing other stuff, answering emails and adding value to their systematic chain. So really, I'd rather produce 5 reports read by 5 people than 50 reports read by no one. And then critical mechanisms, a few things. But again, I would go right to the end. Demonstrations to influence. Senior decision makers don't care who ATDU is. They don't care who I am. They don't care what our vision is. And there are too many layers of people trying to get promoted and just clearing their inboxes as a mechanism of doing their job well for what I see to generally gain traction. And that will be my 15 minutes up. 30 seconds. But really creating a demonstration that can really encapsulate the new world we are trying to create to decision makers, I think that is far more tangible and will influence far better. So I was lucky that I inherited a system of sprints from my predecessor, turned it into pillars. The industry dinner night, where ATDU creates out of nowhere a networking opportunity for defense, etc. The combat pairing program, that inside of the engagements we've had with a couple of companies where we have a vision, they go, okay, we can help you with that. And then that's iterative. No contract was written. It was their equipment at their cost. But our They come and they spend time with us, and that unwritten development. And I know that it's not always very lucrative for industry at this stage, but actually you're playing the long game. You're engaging, you're refining what you're trying to do so that when you do hit the market, you're absolutely there and you've benefited from that collaboration effectively for free. Lurcher and Brian Muntz. I don't put corporal. He is a corporal. The Army will not make him a sergeant until he goes back to 3 para to be in charge of the MT vehicle park, which again is a real, sadness to the Army. He has to leave to become a DNS engineer to continue to contribute to defense as he should. And then again, ATU and coherence. I mean, that we'll come into more detail if you're interested. I doubt you are. This I would commend to you as genuinely interesting. It's the future, I think, of uncrewed ground vehicles, controlled through crewed vehicles, remote controlled, glass armor, AI, etc., but not exciting swarm mini drone BS. It's stuff that technology exists that we need. But as I say, the issue, unresourced, decision led by others, and the US, I think, are doing it well. We've decided not to. I mean the UK, and then this is what the Army Trials Unit does. So my organization now coheres all these capabilities, and note the name changes away from role engineer trial and development to military engineering, role artillery to joint effects, etc. So exciting times and lots of lessons from the basic to the better to just over the horizon what could be best. And I think lessons that are transferable to the training as well as the technology environment. Thank you.
Hey, so James, thanks again. I'd say when you initially got up here, you said you didn't have a lot to offer in this space, but I'll tell you, and this is for everybody that's listening, that was a great military demonstration of how you get the best practices. And I think for the developers in the room on behalf of industry, your perspective from a military background is most certainly important for us to develop the right capability that the end users, that being the guys in the green uniforms, need. We also are going to shift and give you some of the academic perspective. And so next up, we're going to have Professor Ornella Piva from Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences in Netherlands. Professor Piva is renowned in her research and academic contributions in applied sciences, and she will provide us an academic perspective on improving practices.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, my name is Ornella Schavemaker-Piva. It's a combined Dutch-Italian name. First of all, already apologize for my accent. I'm Italian, but I'm living in the Netherlands, and I pick up accents from everywhere. So if you hear something strange, then you know why. Today, I would like to share you my view from 2 different perspectives. One is my experience as a software engineer developing simulations for the military, and the other one is my actual position as an assistant professor at the university. Well, today my template, as you can see, is pretty blank, and I will tell you why. Oh, I need this one. At the moment, I'm still an assistant professor at the university, but that will end soon. Starting from September 1st, I will join the Army and be a strategic business developer at the innovation unit of the Army. So my role will be to initiate innovation projects, to find the right people to do the right job and put them all together. Well, as already said, I have a technical background. And well, today, if you want to contact me, I just put my private email address because I don't have my new one yet, and the old one won't last long. I want to start today with a quote, and it's a quote by Albert Einstein. Tell me and I'll forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I'll understand. Basic, better, best. Tell me and I forget. I could do that with my students. I could just stand in the classroom and tell them things. Will they remember? I don't think so. Well, that I hope so. I hope they will remember something, but then it is very basic. And I also could have done the same when I was working as a software engineer. I could just have done my job. Somebody tells you, do this, and you do it. Well, for me, it's basic and it doesn't give you better results or a better product. But if I show my students some things, so at least they will remember something, they have a picture of it, they get much more the idea of it. But what I think it's best to do is just to involve them. And that is what I want, what every teacher wants, that is to stimulate the so-called deep learning. And no, it has nothing to do with AI, but it's, well, a term of educational sciences and is one of the highest level of learning from the Bloom taxonomy. Well, I won't bother you further with these details. But now I have a question for you. How many of you in this room did experience a software project that went wrong? Please show me your hands. Me too. Why? Why do you think is that? Well, my take on that is the real understanding of the problem behind, or the lack of it. We are trying to combine two words, the word of the military on one side and the word of the software engineers, the software developers on the other side. And really, these two words speak different languages. They don't understand each other, even if they speak English or Dutch or something else. But they don't really understand the what, the how, and most of all, the most important of all, the why you're doing things. So if you really want to achieve results, better results, you have to have these two words to understand each other. And I think that involvement is a key to achieve that. Well, when I worked as a software engineer for TNO, Defense and Safety, which is the Dutch equivalent of the STL, I developed simulations of different kinds for the Army and the Air Force. And what I did was not just sitting behind my desk and program something. I always started going with the military to training, participate to training, talk to trainers, ask questions, sometimes also silly questions, but just have the involvement and the understanding of what are they doing, and most of all, why are they doing that like that? So that gave me a new perspective, a new insight in what they really needed, what the problem was, and that put me in a state of trying to give them better software, better simulations. That doesn't make me an operational expert. I'm not at all. I'm not a military person. I'm just a nerd. But I really experienced it. So I really got a better understanding, and that put me in the state of doing things better. In a couple of months, I will join the Army, work for the Army, and I want to do the same. In my new job, I really want to go to the military people, participate to trainings, participate to exercises, and really get a better understanding of the problem that lies behind. And then I can find the better solution for them that really suits them. But involvement is not only one way. As you see in the picture, we have always the three persons, the three keys that are involved in every project. So on one side, you have the companies, of course, they have to make money. On the other side, you have the customer, the military customer. And on the other side, you have the SMEs. And you have to talk to everybody to understand each other and to understand the needs of all of them. Involvement goes two ways. It's not only the companies and the people working on the development side that really need to understand the needs of the customer, but I think it's the other way around too. So have the military people try to understand, and of course they don't have to become software experts. It's not needed. But when you understand each other, so you can communicate much better and have a better understanding of what is going on and what you are going to do. Now I have another word for you, and that will be the last today. Henry Ford said, if you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you always got. So the key is, to try to think in another way. The downside of being an expert in something is that you develop a kind of tunnel vision, and it makes more difficult to think outside of the box. And that is killing for innovation, of course. So you have to force yourself to think differently. So we already heard the story of StJohn. He's also thinking in a different way, and that is the key for have things moving. So here's my next challenge to you. Involve young people, involve students. And why is that? Because they really ask a lot of questions. And sometimes they might sound silly questions. Sometimes they might have you frown a bit, like, why are you asking this question? But if you think about it, those questions make you think about the underlying problem. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this for so long? Well, because I always done this way. And that's key for changing. When you understand that, you can just move forward and have the innovation. So, and that is what I'm trying to do with my students. I developed a lot of courses, and then I put the students in the middle of the triangle, but it doesn't fit in the triangle. That's on purpose. They don't fit in yet. And that's a good thing. They don't have to. They're still learning. They're studying. They're developing. And you don't want them to fit in yet, because you need them not to fit in, to ask difficult questions or strange questions. When I created my courses, I developed many of them semester-long courses, so that's equivalent to 30 credits. It's a pretty big portion of their entire study. And one thing that all my courses had in common was I didn't test the knowledge, the theoretical knowledge. I didn't do that. I tested at the end the results of the project. So my students were working on projects designed by real companies based on real problems, and they had the possibility to choose one of the projects. So that's good for the motivation, of course. If you have to do a project you don't like, well, you're like, oh, okay, I will do that. And also work on projects, start defining the real problem, talk to the customer, talk to SMEs, define requirements, develop, test, make mistakes, develop again, talk again, test again. Well, does it sound like a real project to me? Yes, it does. But that's also made in a safe environment. They are allowed to make mistakes. And that's from the mistakes that they learn a lot. And doing this, it's also a win-win situation for the company as well. I mean, if you have students that don't cost you anything, my students are for free, but they are trying something new. Mostly those kind of projects are proof concepts. And if the project fails, it's also very valuable to the company. Well, for the students, it's not a nice thing to end up with, well, it doesn't work, but it's very valuable for the company as well. It saves them a lot of money and time investing in something that won't work. So they can just put it aside and start on a new track, start something different. And the other part of the win-win situation is that the students get to be involved in real projects. They get to get how do you call it? Some experience and to develop themselves into a young professional, and that is what we want to deliver to industry when they will finish. So, oh, wait a second. I have a success story for you. In 2018, we started a project with some students. The course was called IT Innovation for Defense. And on the left side, you will see a very trivial proof of concept. The Simulation Center in Amersfoort asked us to develop something because they wanted to try virtual reality. They wanted to try out what they could do with virtual reality. So we decided to develop an anti-tank weapon. Well, as you can see, it's pretty trivial. It was just a green PVC pipe with a camera tripod underneath and some sensors on it. But at the end, the students, when they develop this concept, they always talk to SMEs, they talk to the military, and they delivered this project to the military, and they could try it out. And that's one of the most important things. When you don't know technology, when something is new, you're not keen into trying, or you don't know what to do with it. But just seeing it, being able to try it out, then the idea came. And well, that resulted in 2024 is an actor project with my future colleagues and also TNO and SenseGlove. This first proof concept has developed into a mortar trainer, and they're still working on it. And you can see the difference, I hope. And well, it took a long time, because 6 years in between is really a long time. But we went from just a small trial into something that is developing into a real training asset. One last ingredient I want to add to this is start small. And I really like the bottom-up approach, just working with operational people, because they know their needs, they've been there, they use the systems, and they can tell you what the real problems are. I know that it's not easy to do projects without official procurements, and well, it takes a long time to have an official project just being approved. But starting small, like my colleague this morning said, starting small, just make small steps, and you will be just walking a long way. My final slide, I have a call. I have a call for the industry, a call for the military people, and a call for the academia. My call to the military is involve civilians that will develop your capabilities and your solutions for your work. Have them to come along, invite them to your exercises, talk to them, have them really understand what you're doing and what your needs are. My call to the industry is have your developers, software and systems engineer, just go to the field. And well, fortunately, I heard yesterday one company did that. So I talked to a developer that really talked to SMEs, went to trainings. So he really had a better understanding, and he was able to develop a better product. And also, sorry, my call to industry is involve young people. The next gen here, they are here, they open-minded, and they will help you further to develop better solutions. And well, last but not least, my call to academia, have your students work on real projects, on real problems, because in this way they will be much better involved and they will have a better understanding, and talk to them, have them to go to the military, have them to participate, and so have everybody involved in this project. One example, the robotic and autonomous systems in Oorschot in the Netherlands, they organize twice a year an event for students. So they set up a safety security campus where universities and military and some industry are working all together. And twice a year they organize a boot camp where students can work together with the military, try different things out, try robots, do some projects. They even get to sleep on the base for the entire week. They're fed. They don't sleep much, I think, but they really enjoyed it, and they get a better understanding of the military world and of the systems they're going to develop. So invest in technology, but invest much more in people, and have them all work together. Military, civilians, students, and teachers. Thank you for your attention.
Hey, so thank you so much, Professor Piva. Who we have up next is Ms. Jennifer Cassar, an acquisition professional in the land domain from Canada, who's joining us virtually from Ottawa. Jennifer's expertise is in program management in the land domain, and she will offer us valuable insight on acquisition best practices.
Hello.
Time now, we're going to have Jennifer join us, and I do understand for the folks in the audience, there potentially is a 20-second lag. Being recorded, don't laugh, guys.
All right. I'm hoping you can hear me now. Thank you for having me. I run the land simulation and training section here within the Department of National Defense. And although this is a more generic presentation, I do believe what I'm saying is that it's much more important in the simulation and training domain, as we're actually considering the vision of a person, not necessarily the actual simulation device itself. We are constructing the person. So to set the stage for my presentation for best practices, I'm using an analogy and adopting it that I found in a LinkedIn article by Andrew Webb in 2022. What I'm hoping you will see as we move through the basic to best is that the tools and requirements are more sophisticated and derived, but in the end that it is the culture and the relationships that we build or diminish over time to the degree of that nature. Now, imagine that you are in a relationship, whether you're the owner or the service provider, and you're representing that relationship by something we all value, whether it be pieces of gold, nuggets of silver, or volumes of candy. For me, I like the idea of candy. They might be from the store down the street or the cheese drawer in your fridge, which is unfortunately my case, that's been unceremoniously converted into the gummy bear stash. So however you think about this, think about how we represent as a service provider. You're here with a full bucket of candy and you want to send pieces my way as the owner. So each time we meet, I take out my bucket, which may not be so full, and I place it between us. So the most basic of relationships is a transactional relationship where the service provider does something I like and I give him a new quality street or a couple of gummy bears. And if that goes wrong, then you have to, and you've let me down in some sort of way, that candy I will take back. So in a most basic of transactional relationships, what can't we live without? And what do we need to have in the bucket? What do we need to have in addition to the bucket, as well as the candies? And in that context of acquiring and maintaining goods and services, there may be some other parameters that ensure the successful transaction. So what must be in place for that basic transaction? You need to have a basic requirement, i.e. the relationship and the contract to enforce. But honestly, I think it's more than that, bringing us to the analogy that the culture of the basic relationship is defined by a give and take, but it's also defined by what is good and what is lacking. So from a stakeholder and culture perspective, at that most basic level, throughout the equipment and or service life cycle, all stakeholders must have a shared understanding of what that vision of the equipment should be and or that service enterprise. The implementer must understand that the basics of the equipment and the services that are being asked by the Canadian Armed Forces are well understood, but together then they need to go and communicate that to the contracting authority and the service provider. By no means is this easy, but it is essential. Without this, we can't determine what is good or bad, or what we need to give and take. So to improve this basic set of alignment needs, we need to look at some practices. Did we define the responsibility and roles of each member of the enterprise correctly, or at all? Do we know what the musts, shoulds, and coulds be for that vision? And can each person explain what that is pertinent to each of their roles? Is there an entity that can challenge, whether that be an official or unofficial third party? Do you have a project schedule where all of those parties involved have input and agreed to expectations? And what are we not developing in isolation? So we need that collaborative space so that we can have all parties access it and be together. Now we know who can move the candies, those are the roles and responsibilities, and how they might be moved back and forth, but we also need to understand what makes a good or bad transaction. So we need to look at the requirements side of things. And I know this, probably from your perspective, and as I was drafting this, from mine, that all requirements, easy peasy, done. But I challenge you to define what we are actually exchanging the candies for. And secondly, is that vision that I have in my mind about that business enterprise accurately replicated in yours? To this end, my team and I have been exploring getting better at defining the needs based on empirical evidence, vice experience brought from the field, and also users' preferences and good ideas that may gum up what is actually needed, vice desired. We've introduced our own lessons learned and deemed that these be essential to success. To look at the operational research, for example, to ensure that the problem being looked at is systematically viewed vice by opinion, or through any biased view of life experience. So again, we get at the musts while looking at the shoulds and coulds. We are looking to also improve, and we have done, improving our industry engagements that make market and do market research by asking deeper and more effective questions and narrowing that over the time of the development of the rich picture or that requirement set. This allows the perspectives to be seen from all angles and allows for a more concise vision to be developed. Even for the smallest of contracts, we are rebuilding a culture around the principles of systems engineering, which in turn provides us the room to revalidate and revolve around some complications or some risks. So when we look at this, we are creating value in driving a vision, and also in a cultural sense, we're driving the right kind of behaviors inside that culture. And I will add here that in the new text, in the two other text points that I've got on the slide, infrastructure is part of that system of system relationships. We want to know what is and isn't there, hopefully from the basic set. And from an intellectual property standpoint, we need to make sure that even before we start building a simulator, that our sibling contracts, to which those contracts where we're buying the actual operational pieces of equipment, have the hooks in to allow us to use their data for applications outside of that main business. This last main point, of course, is effectively parts that make the contract. Now, harking to our candies and the rules of exchange, bringing us near full circle around to the behavior and culture. We need to look at the basic needs of the management of the contract and as it revolves around the behavior. The contracting authority must really review and remedy the situation, and the implementer must guide the contracting authority to what is wrong. The project director may need to provide evidence to the implementer, and the service provider should listen or must listen and adhere to what is stated, but also provide data to support their side of the argument. Most often than not, this isn't necessarily well understood, and in those cases, we must ask for clarity. Of course, timeliness in all of this is imperative. When I look at this from my experience, I found that from our context, we're often too polite as the technical authority, potentially even as the contracting authority. Both sides, too many gentle people agreements that don't necessarily get to the due diligence of the documentation as it is set, which hinders the development of the program. And we don't necessarily stand up for our points of view with quantitative evidence and show why, really be demonstrative in that nature. The credibility of both organizations is lessened as either side of the candy exchange isn't necessarily holding up their side of the business. And eventually, it could become so bad that no candies are effectively transacting. So this poses a big issue. Stale candies. No one wants to trade for stale candies. So some more real life examples from my in-service team. We had a contract where we had a vendor to which we sole sourced a new contract, sort of the 2.0. And we moved the business to a new paradigm where we were able to do asset management more in accordance with the policy set by our business. The challenge there was that the vendor understood the business and had been understanding the business for over a decade, but not necessarily what the business needed to be now. And we hadn't actually sat down and reviewed the changes with that vendor and what the behaviors that we were expecting. So we had just assumed that we had written in words and that it would be clear. Addition to that, we hadn't really gone over the roles and responsibilities around the business as well. So we didn't necessarily understand who was doing what and when, and vice versa. So we immediately ran into trouble, lo and behold, and we had difficulty because we were polite. We were thinking, oh, it's this teething pain, change management. But from a technical authority perspective, we were looking at our partners to perform a certain quality of business, and we just weren't getting there. And of course, frustration ensues. So taking the simple solution apart, you can see that the basics I've noted here would have allowed an improved alignment against a new vision and an assured understanding of where that enterprise is going to go and what a good or lacking transaction should be. Now, what is better? So we go back to our analogy and think about our candies. So we need to think about the quality of the interaction at this point. The higher the quality, the more value can be deemed, and then therefore, the more candies I can actually transact back and forth. So this means instead of doing a 1 candy to 1 candy ratio, I might do 5 candies and give that over if I deem the quality of value. Now, there may also be multiple parties in that business, and I may now have the opportunity to put candies in other people's buckets, thus enriching their direct or indirect stakeholders of my ultimate business. So what allows us to actually move those candies back and forth in heaping handfuls, noting that, of course, those heaping handfuls can be taken back for lacking effectively. So when we think of moving from a transactional business to one where we venture on the cusp of a relationship, we need to go deeper into the aspects of planning and executing to create value, while not forgetting the deeper aspects of the communication practices and incentivizations. So the place to really define the value comes right up front in the planning. When there's time spent on developing plans and modeling, there's an immediate payback. There is a value, mainly in the reduction of risk and providing a defendable solution and potentially a process space that would allow for the injection of shoulds and coulds. And people will know this immediately up front. So although I can't see you, I want each of you to think about how many of us actually model a business enterprise from any other aspect other than financial. I'd like to challenge you here. So one example I have is in a modernization project inside my team, where we are looking at basically doing operational research. We're looking at a more detailed approach to our industry engagement to inform all the parameters of the enterprise that we're trying to develop. We are setting values to each of those sub-elements of that enterprise and providing a set of constraints for that business at large. In the end, we're looking to come up with a model that will quantitatively define the asset mix of that system. And we're hoping that this model can then be used over time to ensure that any engineering changes that might affect the model will allow us to understand if we've affected the optimization based on the parameters of that time. So then, leveraging the equipment set with this optimization, we have a better defined understanding of what the support construct should be from a maintenance and support context, and therefore what the training outcomes would likely have to be. We've eliminated also the ambiguity around the business to know what the right volume of equipment and thus creating value, so we're not necessarily overbuying in particular areas. And I'd like to say at this point, we should have a couple of handfuls of candies. So we also need to not overlook processes, and there's a thread there against at least 3 of the presentations now. Again, another small question for you all. Outside of pre-established processes by your company or your organization, how many of you have asked questions in industry engagements around how we intend to work as a partnership, how our processes and procedures may need to change based on the need to potentially establish new ones or adapt internal ones for our mutual needs? Better practices here will ensure that the contracts are driven to a culture where you engage early and often. You should have to use the terms and you shouldn't have to use the terms and conditions in the contract for issue management. What I'm suggesting here to have a better approach is that you have a means to have effectively a marriage counselor role. Also, setting the culture to immediately provide value through instituting risk management and lessons learned observed is absolutely key. Again, these are hinting at the proactive approach at dealing with impending issues, and it by no means can eliminate any injection to betterment. In fact, it should encourage it. At this point, why wouldn't I have a handful of potentially quality streets and, hand them back to my business and say, get on with it? Of course, the seemingly simplest of practices, templates, communication tools, protocols, data management, all of these have to be set up in advance and repeatable. When we talk about repeatability, we get reliability, and that drives us to the execution with a dabble of culture. What are the options that are available through the life of the enterprise? And thinking even deeper to that next level, what are the options we can find in the places where we don't think are any? And I'm going to provide a small example here. When we think about the core portions of our business, the firm, fixed rate, the daily business, you're like, there's probably nothing there. I would hesitate. There would be a basic level of leanness that I suspect most of us can drive through removing duplications or leaning any processes. To this effect, you as the business person may have actually driven some profit, but you haven't necessarily shared it with me. So I can't necessarily provide you more candies for actually driving betterment inside of my business model. Now, you again might argue that your ability to generate more candy on your own is actually better than actually providing me some candies and then us working through it together. But you mustn't forget that candies also come in the form of credibility and reputation. Sharing is obviously a way to drive credibility, and your reputation then comes from that. So lo and behold, I've just incentivized effectively a value gain system in the contract. Listening, of course, is the most valuable communication skill out there, and we must actively listen as opposed to pretend to listen in the better construct. Thinking about meetings where we can conduct capability integration reviews as opposed to program review meetings, we're thinking forward, vice backwards. This would also mean from an execution perspective that we can drive value in shaping the equipment plans, how we're going to shape and mold the systems of the future, and we create realism in that shaping of the growth and change. This takes a lot of conversation and, of course, a lot of listening. And what is really trying to be got at here is the long-term vision of the enterprise. So in the work that my team has been doing, bringing it back to real life, we're attempting to move our culture and planning to the better stance. So we're currently adopting practices and business rhythms to include more real-time lessons gathered and immediate disposition and incorporation where we can. Risk management has become a mainstay for both the projects and my in-service portion. And this has allowed us to articulate our issues better and derive cross-team solutions, as the older systems will inform how we look at our new purchases, and the new purchases will inform how we need to change our in-service business models. We've also found that business lines where we're attempting to move to a capability planning approach, if we can't get it into the contract itself, we're trying to use the framework and the vocabulary to do just that. So to be honest, I'm going to be fair here, that this hasn't been easy. And I don't say we're fully there at the better, but we are challenging our culture, our own internal culture, and the culture of our partners. And what's hard in terms of driving that culture change is we have to move past we need to do planning faster so that we can get to deliveries. We need to get better than just having program being thought of as nothing more than buying parts and acquiring new things. And we also need to get away from delivering should not necessarily be just about requirements that aren't necessarily fully defined or that there isn't precedent set. We need to make sure that each connection works. So I would say we're starting to move in the right direction about the handfuls of our candy, but of course there is the best model. So one last extension of this analogy is we've been successful at passing handfuls of candy back and forth between each other, where we want to extract some of those candies from each of our buckets, because your bucket may be overflowing at this point, maybe mine is, or maybe I'd like to use some of my candies to invest. Where we look to extract to invest, we've added additional services, potentially increased reliability, credibility, or we're allowing for innovation that could generate new business for either party. Andrew Webb takes this analogy one further step and suggests that when our buckets of candy are overflowing, that in fact, industry would be very remiss, and also from an ownership perspective, we would be very remiss. And it's important that he has suggested that those service providers should be using this in the favor of their clients, not necessarily in the favor of themselves. All right, so what makes us the best setup? We fall again on culture with a bit of innovation and incentivization. When it comes to the overflowing aspects of cultural needs, we are really after having the honest and frank conversations on the business line and its future. All parties come together without each other's agenda, and we're actually actively accomplishing the same vision. Ideas should not be like pulling teeth from the vendor or the client, and it should happen in a more collaborative space, an open space where all ideas are welcomed and evaluated based on the risk and reward context. This collaborative space also allows us to exchange integrated lessons and upgrade processes in real time. Ultimately, we see the reinvestment of our profit, our candies, as partners. Can the owner find a way to leverage their value, their extra candies that they're putting into my business to generate further outcomes for themselves? i.e., can you inject something into my business that you can then go and leverage and market as another item? From a business perspective, I honestly couldn't think of any examples of where this is in fact the case. I'm sure they're out there, but I'm really sure that they're far and few between. And it takes strong personalities to ensure that communications don't devolve to the transactional level. It takes the right team and business rhythm to ensure that the business practices are kept up in real time. And it takes the management involved to be open to a culture of mutual cooperation. Again, I can say this is not easily attained. And from my own observation, government is often very risk averse as a client, and the projects and programs aren't always rewarded for pushing this kind of behavior. So in conclusion, if we want to move from a place where we can start to explore value in a business enterprise, we need to look at the culture we're trying to develop, and making sure that transactions are easy, but that they have a value that's required and instills change and betterment for me as a client. We also need to focus on listening and creating a singular direction that allows for opportunities and incentivization and a thoughtful use of profit. Thank you.
All right, Jennifer, hopefully you can hear the warm welcome and applause that you got in the room. Your briefing was well received. Acquisition reform is extremely important to all of us. But without further ado, the final presentation that we have is a dynamic duo from Lockheed Martin. Hopefully I didn't put too much pressure on you guys. We got Abby Duggan and Justin Megawarne, and they'll be presenting on a comprehensive view of using better data to design, measure, and adapt collective training performance.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Justin Megawarne. I'm the CTO of 4GD. I've been working in the defense tech space for the last 5 to 6 years. I'm a serial tech director, and I've performed multiple CTO duties in a scale-up entrepreneurial context. I help my businesses build multi-million-pound valuations from scratch by creating transformative technology within their chosen industries.
Thanks, Justin. I'm Abby Duggan of Alliance. I'm an individual and collective training consultant and prior Army Education and Training Services officer with infantry and battle group headquarters experience. I've worked in industry for the last 12 years, specialising in safety critical training needs analyses and competence management approaches, laying the foundations for optimum training solutions.
So today we want to share a bit of a philosophy and some thinking on how to create better training data for improved collective training performance in an Army context. But first, we have to ask something a little bit strange. What does it mean for something to be true in this domain? And as weird a question as this seems, why do we care about the truth? As in, what are our specific whys? The simple answers are that we care deeply about the past, and we care deeply about the future. For the past, what's happened before creates not only the opportunity to identify critical errors and potential improvements, but crucially creates accountability for who needs to make it better and how. And for the future, understanding the past allows us to lead into the future with the ability to make solid, reliable predictions, giving us assurance about the huge investments we are yet to make in training.
The British Army is addressing a combined arms manoeuvre performance gap. It's simultaneously incorporating new evolving tactics, techniques, and procedures in both combat and mission-ready training pipelines to counter a pacing threat. The Army Collective Training System presents a one-in-a-generation opportunity to design and deliver a model that will drive collective performance from first principles to ensure operational readiness and effectiveness. The military is accustomed to applying a systems approach to analysing and designing individual training. However, the methodology for an equivalent approach to collective training is immature and hasn't been developed to align with the Army's force generation needs. To offer thinking in this domain, we believe that driving collective performance from first principles means following a methodology whereby training must be based on well-articulated requirements set at the top level, leading to suitable and reinvigorated collective training objectives. And training must be tailored to the needs of the full training audience. Crucially, though, data collection requirements need to be built in during the design process. To successfully address the combined arms manoeuvre gap and get our force elements to a level of readiness that meets the expectations of UK defence, we need to know two critical things that bring us closer to the truth. And knowing these two things will tell us precisely what we need to know about collective training performance and inform the iterative analysis, design, delivery, assurance cycle for the betterment of the British Army in the contemporary operating environment. The first of these is, what is the collective training requirement? What do we need our force elements to do? And the second, what data do we need to collect? How can we monitor and measure the right performance in the right way? And how can this data drive better future training?
Data is only growing and becoming more complex. We are adding more variables all the time. Biometrics, weapon handling, body movement, comms data, virtual interactions, vehicle usage, video data, schedule data, field data, and the list goes on and on and on. We are adding new analytical techniques all the time, from classical statistical analyses to machine learning to computer vision. The roadmap stretches out as far as you can imagine. And what's more, the sheer volume of data forces us to closely examine the quality of what we are collecting. And when I say we are examining quality, I mean we are examining the fundamental nature of good data collection. The things that, if we leave them behind, will lead to an explosion of data toxic waste, and at worst, make things worse because the data misled us. So what makes good data? Well, if any of you have heard of Dieter Rams, the chief designer of Brown, you may be familiar with his principles of good design. These principles kicked off an entire new movement of design, culminating in the Bauhaus movement, the era of user experience, and in the modern day, the design ethic of companies like Apple, who are now a $3 trillion organization. In that spirit, we would today like to propose the fundamental principles of good data, contextualized for Army collective training. Some of these are obvious, some of them are less so, but are, in our view, non-negotiable given our impending data future. The first principle is that good data is accurate. It is a true reflection of reality. Without the truth, your outcomes will be wrong. Now, this might seem really obvious, but you'll be amazed at the number of people who will make excuses for good enough data or noisy data. Sometimes that's unavoidable. Generally, it's down to low standards. Ex falso quod libet, which means from a falsehood, any conclusion can be derived.
In collective training, this relates to assessment, validity, and appropriacy. We need to measure the performance we are supposed to be measuring, and this must relate to the underpinning training performance required, articulated by a training requirements authority.
Secondly, good data is relevant. It is clearly related to the reasons that motivated its collection. Its presence is welcomed. It is not distracting or confusing. You can show that the cost and effort of collecting the data bears fruit.
And for collective training, this is about the data reflecting conformity to a training standard, as articulated by a training delivery authority. It must be relevant to the training in progress and to the design and delivery of future training.
Good data is unbiased. It presents facts as they are, not as we wish them to be. Fair data ensures just conclusions. If your data doesn't embarrass you sometimes, or shine light on a problem you'd rather not have known about, it's probably biased.
And for collective training, this is about the observer mentors and ex-con accessing relevant and accurate data when it is most needed. It enables us to monitor progress against specific training objectives, success factors, and/or critical errors.
Good data is timely. It arrives at the moment it's most needed. Timely data prevents outdated responses. If we're making decisions on combat readiness or the fundamental progress of an individual, we need to know how they are doing right now.
In collective training, this is about fairness and doing what we can to harvest objective data over subjective data where applicable. It enables us to adapt training as required.
Good data is comprehensive. It captures all necessary details, avoiding the risk of missing that key critical insight. Incompleteness distorts understanding and leads to oversight.
In collective training, this is about collecting the optimum data to reveal insight that is of relevance and value to the training audience and the requirement setters.
Good data is easy to process. It should allow individuals to focus on analysis rather than on preparing data. Valuable time should not be spent cleaning or reformatting it. Many different people need to work with data, from data scientists to software engineers, business analysts, unit commanders, end users, accountants. Every one of these people should be able to access data and insights in the format they need.
This is vital for collective training, given the in-field conditions and the pace and complexity of training serials.
Good data is traceable. Its origins are always known. Traceability confirms data's integrity. If you cannot vouch for or assert the provenance of data, it's as good as letting the enemy make it up and misdirect you. If you cannot trace back to the origin of a data point, you can never do root cause analysis of the problems that you discover.
And this is critical for the assurance of collective training. All training serials and related data must be pegged to a rigorous audit trail.
And finally, good data is profound. It has the potential to transform mindsets, impact decisions, and alter the course of history. Profound data reshapes thinking and strategy on fundamental levels. Profound data is not about incremental improvement, but about a huge strategic advantage.
For collective training, this is about fostering a trust in the data. We must exploit it and use it to our advantage, embracing and overcoming any training failures through rich and objective insights which enable us to adapt. This will help us overcome the combined arms maneuver gap and equip ourselves as operationally effective force elements, countering the pacing threat.
But ultimately, good data cannot be profound if we do not adhere to the aforementioned principles. So what? What does this all mean? First of all, you can't paper over or fix data after the fact. It might seem cheaper and quicker to just collect whatever we can get and fix it later. But that will cost you more in the long term in cleanups and stable mucking, and in negative value.
And in collective training, in this context, we want to avoid the temptation to collect all the data we possibly can. Data collection must relate back to an original training requirement, and it must be of value for future training development.
We also can't hope for silver bullets like AI to fix bad data. AI is most effective when it is trained on the truth, and that means the truth has to exist in the first place, either in past data so it can make predictions, or in the current data so you're moving it in the right direction. AI can produce stupid answers from wrong data so convincingly that your head will spin.
So let's finely tune our collective data collection requirements from the outset and harvest good data through the training, delivery, and assurance stages. In doing this, we'll be in a position to exploit good data to inform improved training design.
We have to create standards over what constitutes acceptable. Are we all on the same page as an industry on these basic principles? Does everyone agree that these principles are worth investing in? Are they worth the extra headache and heartache and cost? Is anyone being held accountable in any way for these principles? And the final so what, which I'll tell you as soon as my phone turns back on. Tasking people to own data quality and defend it. We talk a lot about data scientists and business analysts who take data and try to draw insights from it. We also talk about data architects who try to design the systems in the first place. But what about the people who must look after the data that's already in there? Who is going to challenge its quality and its veracity? Who's going to push back if someone is pouring pollution into the data lake? Who is going to trim the irrelevant? Who is going to update historical data where it could lead to insight? Who are the data gardeners who are in love with beautiful data?
And there's a running theme here. By articulating the training requirement in detail and therefore establishing our related data needs from the outset, we can build that into our collective solution for Army collective training, targeting the right data in the first place, protecting it, exploiting it for the benefit of UK defence. Justin.
So that is a lot to digest. The overall message is actually quite simple. Data is expanding at an insane rate, and it's only getting worse. The faster it expands and the more voluminous it becomes, the harder it will be to control quality, and the higher the risk of drawing terrible conclusions of huge negative consequence. Therefore, we have to get a grip on good data right now before it spirals out of the petabytes and into the exabytes and the zettabytes. That means formulating a constitution of good data principles that anyone touching data can understand, defend, and adhere to. And like all good constitutions, it needs to have some force behind it, because sometimes you have to refresh the tree of good data with the blood of data tyrants.
We're passionate about simplifying the complex regarding data in the Army collective training domain, but the trick is to further develop a systematic training methodology and get it to a place where it balances the academic, the scientific, and the pragmatic, setting out well-articulated performance requirements to enable rigorous training, analysis, and design processes that consider data all the way through. We're excited to have had the opportunity to share this thinking with you this afternoon, and we'll welcome your questions in the QA session. And I believe a copy will also be posted on the Alliance webpage.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So I once was told that I've been known to underpromise and overdeliver. So again, how about that dynamic duo? Hey, team, join us up here on the stage here. At this time, we're going to have a panel discussion with the little time that we have left. I do have an administrative note for those that want to engage Jennifer online. That 10 to 20 second lag has now went up to over a minute. So I'm going to encourage folks that have questions for Jennifer. If you're in the room, get those to the team in the rear. And if you're online, post those questions. We're going to encourage Jennifer to answer those questions. Luckily for you guys, I was highly encouraged by all the diverse backgrounds of our panelists, whether it was industry, academia, or military. I've had the opportunity to engage at all levels, being a military officer and an acquisition professional, and most certainly holding high standards to industry. But one more time, how about a round of applause for all of our panel members? Now, I won't take you guys' thunder because I definitely got questions that I'd like to tee up for these guys, but this is really your time. So I do see one hand, and if there's anybody else, we'll get a microphone over to you, to the gentleman in the corner here. Yeah, by that time you could have came up here. We go.
Is that? Sorry, the question's mine to the last presentation about data.
Sorry, here we go, Andy.
Yeah,
Sorry, otherwise people that
thank you.
can't.
The question is about data. It may be applicable to the other speakers. I didn't hear shareable, the idea that you could share data between different, you did mention different users of data, but surely being shareable, maybe having similar standards of data would be extremely useful. I just want to add that one. And the other one is a session yesterday where people sometimes don't know the questions they want to ask about training. And there was this kind of idea of where industry said, well, we could give you answers to this, but we don't know what questions the Army, say, or the military want to ask about training. So it's that idea of where you actually don't know what you want to ask. So it's all well and good saying, well, yeah, and I get it, the data should flow from the question, but sometimes you don't know what question you want to ask. Does So there's those 2 points. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So either Justin, Abby, you guys care to talk about shareable data?
Yeah, shall I just respond to the one about shareability? I think that's absolutely correct. You're probably going to influence our data principles now, and I'll add another one. But it's all implied in creating good data and making it easy to process. That's the main point, I think, where we really take into account the fact that data is often inaccessible, either literally inaccessible because people can't get to it, or when they finally get to it, it's incomprehensible and therefore psychologically inaccessible.
Okay. Yeah. So your second question, sir, I think not to put you on spot, Colonel St. John, but maybe in your wheelhouse.
In a way, rather than answering your question, I totally agree. And listening to the final presentation, I also picked up on the issue, which was, kind of training requires high-level requirements articulated. And it makes absolute sense, everything you said, and I totally buy into it, except when you think that actually the minute you go to, we need to establish requirements, you then ossify yourself to a traditional model, like programming, as opposed to probably kind of machine learning, agile, scale-free, iterative, where, let's say, rather than the traditional military training model of here's the training requirements and we've built the data capture to build it, just go and train. Soldiers kind of know what they're trying to achieve. And yes, it feels uncomfortable to go, oh, you've met the training requirement, but they'll iteratively learn. So I do agree that actually what's probably more interesting is the unknown requirements, the answers we may have for the questions we haven't asked yet. But I get that it turns it upside down and it makes us all deeply uncomfortable. And feel free to throw kind of challenging questions at me too. I don't claim to have any answers, but just questions. Over.
I think it's a great point, and you'd never want to take away that freedom from your soldiers, from your personnel. And that should be encouraged all the way down the chain, and it should flourish. However, I think just to put our presentation in perspective, coming from one of the teams, we're looking at the Army collective training system. Obviously, there's a lot of people here this week looking at that, and we're really talking about the requirements for the higher levels of collective training, and that's where we're really keen to explore that topic. Clearly, we can't have that discussion with the key people at this time for various reasons. However, setting really good requirements will mean that the training design can be spot on. That's not to say that you can't give people freedom at the lower levels, and that should be absolutely encouraged. But getting your needs right at the top means that you can deliver excellent exercises, and that's what we're aiming for.
I just want to add to that. So a point from your presentation, Ornella. There's a saying, it's Henry Ford as well, where he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. And, I find that when you put data people and engineers in the same room with the people who have the needs, if they're observing what's really going on, if they are somehow participating in what's going on, things emerge that nobody thought they needed until they get it.
Just to build on that, whilst ATDU is theoretically the user representative when we go through technology developments, etc., I can't help but hold the users, and I mean other people in green, in slight disregard and disdain, because again, we're obsessed about looking like soldiers at Waterloo in straight lines and dressed in red coats and wearing berets and, beards are bad and all this kind of what I consider archaic BS. And you're right. If you ask soldiers what they want, they'll ask for faster horses every day of the week. And so there is an element for ignoring most users, choosing to listen to enlightened users, but also how Steve Jobs really developed the iPhone. He had a clear vision, and a vision is something that's really important. And then that then drives the development, drives the training requirements, etc., ignoring what other contributions other people may have to that vision, i.e. to change that vision, but they just then follow that wake, which I appreciate turns upside down against the argument of giving people plenty of agency en route. But in the end, you choose a result, like an iPhone, which doesn't give you some freedoms that you have in an Android, but the capabilities are carefully curated, and that stems from a vision from the top, and not asking people what they want, because they'll ask the wrong question.
Oh, does it work?
Yep, light on.
Oh, yes. Well, I think we should not forget the big difference between data and information. I mean, you have data, raw data, and you can collect it, and it must be good data, as you said. But I think there is the moment in which you collect data and then ask questions and put together with the requirements of the exercise or the training you want to reach. At that moment, then you get real information and you can do something with that. So I think, yeah, you're both right, in my opinion. You have to put things together, and at that moment you will have information, and with information you can learn things and you can be better at what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a question out there? So I think we have some questions online, but as we wait for a next question, or potentially not, don't worry, I got plenty of questions. Yesterday I had the opportunity to host a panel myself, Future Frontiers, and mixture of what DSET has kind of ingested here this year in terms of, I hope to be a recurring theme of inviting our younger folks to participate. These young minds are most certainly the future. And so I got a question that kind of is for anybody on the panel, but looking forward, what do you see as to be the next best trend or innovative idea in your particular field that will definitely need to garner best practices?
Getting rid of beards? Sorry, bringing in beards.
From my perspective, I'm a bit of an outsider in the group in the sense that I'm not, well, maybe not, maybe I'm on the same page as Ornella, but you know, I come from a mainly technology and private sector background, and I've been working with a defense firm for 5 years. I'm learning. There's still many acronyms I haven't remembered, but I think for me, what I can see in training is for training to feel a lot more like gaming and to feel a lot more fun, and for people to want to do it all the time, to become more competitive in the same way that esports are very competitive. I can see that when when a soldier sees that someone else is doing slightly better than them and they're on the league table, it changes their behavior completely. And I also think bringing a bit more realism and fear to training and a bit more stress to training. I know we try to do that and we simulate it in various ways, but if you don't have that palpable sense of stress and fear when you go into a training scenario, what can technology bring to that? And I think there's quite a lot, especially as we get into the virtual space.
Yeah, I can most certainly attest to that from the U.S. perspective. I think I spoke yesterday, and for those that don't know, in a prior life, I was the PM of synthetic training environment. So I think you're spot on, bringing that level of realism and the stress that's endured to kind of associate or affect the cognitive behavior of a soldier moving forward is going to be extremely key. And then also something that I think that kind of is remiss sometimes as we talk about the future force, as I mentioned earlier, targeting the youth. I think what's really a struggle for all partners and allies is retention, something that holds that force in place. And it's public news. Everybody's tracking the troubles that the U.S. has had, but since has fixed with sustaining the force. But I think getting after things that drive their interests is most certainly going to be key. I believe we're a little bit at time, or probably over time, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least yield the floor to our panelists for a couple of closing comments. There again, Jennifer, if you hear us online, we did not forget about you. Put your comments in the chat group and we will most certainly get to them. So I'll start from left to right and start with you, good Colonel. Any closing comments?
Really, we're at a inflection point in opportunity and change in training and technology. And I think the coming World War III, or the threat of it, is something that I fear will both positively accelerate everything we're doing, but actually we may decide that, oh, that's really nice over the horizon, but let's just do more of the old stuff today, because I think if we have to if we have to crew the lines across Eastern Europe, it won't be about doing super clever future-y stuff. It'll just be the citizen army manning the trenches. And as much as this is really positive for defense industry and the future of the military, it may just be going back to kind of Waterloo behavior and doing the hard work. Over.
Well, I already did my 3 calls to academia and to industry and to the military. I think what I would like to repeat is just involve young people, because they are our future, also our near future. And without them, there won't be any improvement. And so go there, involve them, and have them work next to you.
Yeah, thanks, Colonel Charles. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've got quite a niche interest here, but I think key for me is just making sure that anything regarding the Defence Systems Approach to Training, or DSET, doesn't continue as a dirty word. It's not meant to be obstructive. It's meant to make sure that training is right. You're not overtraining or undertraining. You're getting training right. And just to play on our last speaker's keyword or key phrase was active listening. I think it's on the parts of people like me in industry to listen to our military counterparts, but equally listen back and listen to the younger generations to make training realistic, quality, make it enjoyable, make it relevant, so that everyone wins.
I'm going to borrow from the Lieutenant Colonel and from you, Ornella. So I think if you want to make change in anything, if you have a good idea, but implementing that idea makes you very uncomfortable, then you should definitely do it. And the group of people that are very good at doing that are young people. And the reason they're good at doing that is not only because they don't know what they don't know, not only because they're always questioning things, but actually they go out of their way to annoy the older generation. And that's actually a very good and positive thing. And we need a bit more of that. Thank you.
Okay, hey, so well, thank you again to all of our panel members. Let's give them one more round of applause. Hey, so it's been fun to be up here with you guys. I hope you enjoyed. This is definitely a topic that does not end here. Better, best practices is ultimately what all of you are trying to get to. One of the things that I'd be remiss that I didn't say, that I always say to anybody that I coach, teach, or mentor, is pay it forward. You may have a solution that works for you and your organization. If you do not pay it forward, shame on you, because it is something that will definitely enhance the greater good of your cause. And if you're not spiritual, so be it. But my mother used to always tell me your blessings are coming from paying it forward. So without further ado, we're going to bring Abby up here for some closing remarks and administrative. Thank you.